Nothing But Truth, and as promised, we are joined by Jessie Jane Duff. She served as a gunnery sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. She is retired. Once a Marine, always a Marine, though. I never say former Marine anymore. And she is a member of the Concerned Veterans for America's organizing committee. Her latest article, Syria and the Mixed Messages to Our Military, certainly is a great read, and I encourage you to check it out. And we'll be posting those things after the show on the Facebook page, Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. And Jessie, great to be with you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, we're honored, big time. And let me ask you this. This is President Obama last night, because this speech was all over the place. And at times Mark Thiessen pointed out today, he used elements of George Bush's past speeches, and then he would take aim at past wars and ending wars and the need for military force. And we heard we heard all about the urgency, and then we're going to have a very, very small strike, according to our Secretary of State, but we don't do pinpricks. So all over the place again. We're going to delay the vote in Congress. That's the big news, among other stories. And here is the president last night stating that. Roll it.
My fellow Americans, for nearly 7 decades, the United States has been the anchor of global security. This has meant doing more than forging international agreements. It has meant enforcing them. The burdens of leadership are often heavy, but the world's a better place because we have borne them. And so, to my friends on the right, I ask you to reconcile your commitment to America's military might with a failure to act when a cause is so plainly just. To my friends on the left, I ask you to reconcile your belief in freedom and dignity for all people with those images of children writhing in pain and going still on a cold hospital floor. For sometimes resolutions and statements of condemnation are simply not enough.
Tell me, Jessie Jane, tell me, when you hear that, and it wasn't the actual section of him delaying the vote, my apologies, but he's appealing to both sides. He's saying, okay, right, get on board. You know the need for military force. And then on the left, appeals to the motion. See those kids who died, 1,400 women and children among them? What is the military, as someone who has served, as a part of the Concerned Veterans for America group, tell me, what do you interpret from that?
When I was watching this speech, the only thing that I kept thinking was, where is he going? Where is he going? You know, my sense of anticipation was very confused. Because I still think like I'm on active duty. I did serve 20 years. And I'm like, what is he going to say next? And by the time it was over, I sat there and I thought, just like in my article with his last speech in the Rose Garden, what just happened? You have been telling us how important this is, but you don't call Congress back for an emergency session. You postpone. Now you're essentially saying to people how important their belief in freedom is, or how their belief in war is. It really, it just became to me that he was a paper tiger. It just became discussed on some levels. I felt that this administration has not led from the front, but now we have Putin leading him. And that's really a surprising thing to think or say.
A lot of mixed emotions when it comes to, and different opinions, looking at Iraq in hindsight. But as we look at leaders, we definitely have distinct records and actions. We had Reagan, as you mentioned. You knew where you stood. Trust but verify. The man called out the enemy, evil empire, and as Natan Sherinsky points out, he would speak to the idea of freedom and what we stood for. Clinton, not so much. And then we had President George W. Bush, who spoke to those issues as well, and I believe, and my opinion is, that he did the best he could under the circumstances. Obviously don't agree with every decision, but when you're making decisions on war, you have to calculate some things that there are known unknowns and known knowns. And we never realize after taking action, and you could you could educate me on this far better, having served 20 years, but when we take an action, what we may have prevented, we don't get that luxury. But we are judged on what actually took place and only the cost of what that action was, as opposed to the cost of not doing something. In the case of military action in Syria specifically, has he made a cogent argument for military action in Syria? Jessie?
No, absolutely not. When I first heard the Secretary speak the Friday before last, it appeared that it was imminent that we would make a strike against Syria. And he did give a very persuasive argument, regardless whether I agreed or not agreed with that argument. It had a conviction to it. And in reality, when you're on active duty, you will follow the orders of your commander-in-chief. So conviction is very, very important. You may not approve or appreciate why we must do something, but the conviction, you step up and do that. Then the next day for the president to stand in the Rose Garden and do pretty much a 180 and then postpone. And then, we get to the point where we're waiting for Congress to come back. Then the argument starts getting very weird, because when we had stated don't cross the red line, it was over a year ago, but yet we've known about these chemical attacks since June. Basically, it's come across to me as wishy-washy, and I would expect anybody on active duty to feel the same way. If you're directed to do something, we shall do it. But one thing I can say, when I was on active duty with President Bush, every step of the way you knew his conviction. He did not waver from it. And he stuck by his conviction that the 5,000 Kurds that were killed in one day by Saddam Hussein, for example, was part of his argument. We're talking about 1,400 people now on August 21st. What about the 100,000 people prior to now? And last night was the first time I heard their number come up. And I thought, this is so all over the map. Mm-hmm. It's frustrating, I think, when you're on active duty, knowing you'll go into harm's way. If you don't have conviction, if you don't have a focus, if you don't have an objective that's clearly stated to you, it can create apathy. It can create apprehension. Essentially, your military has to have a firm leader, and this has not been firm. And I think the American people on both sides of the aisle agree with that.
I think they do too. What gets me is this really can't be too much of a surprise for you when you see what happened with the Status of Forces Agreement in Iraq, as well as what has happened in Afghanistan. And speaking of ending wars, is this built upon your frustration with the administration in the way they've handled Afghanistan and not having a clear directive, as well as reports of not listening to the generals on the ground?
Oh, my goodness. From the time we started pulling out of Iraq, I felt like, here we go again. If anybody had watched Charlie's War, the movie about how we had the congressman that was fighting to get support behind the Afghanistan people when the Russians invaded. And essentially, after we had won that internal war, we essentially abandoned them. And that allowed for the vacuum of the Taliban to step in. When we pulled out of Iraq with the mindset of like, well, we're done here. I'm out of here. This wasn't my war to resolve. And then we go into Afghanistan, and now we have problems with the Taliban still there. I thought, we're not finishing things so that we don't have to worry about them in the future. It's almost as if, you take over as a president, you take over everything. You cannot say, well, this wasn't mine, and abandon it. We're going to have future problems with Iraq, and God willing, we will overcome that, or the country shall. But things have been very unstable over there, and they're still very unstable in Afghanistan. And, aside from those areas, we've got a mess in Benghazi that has yet to be resolved after the removal of their leader. So Libya is a mess. We have Egyptian problems where we didn't get behind the right type of government that was a Muslim Brotherhood all the way up to his removal on July 3rd, even though the people had protested the Sharia type of lawmaking he was beginning to conduct. We've been all over the map, not setting out a strong policy of firm commitment. We're looking as if we are indecisive. We're looking as if we don't know who to support, which we don't in particular in Syria.
Historically,
we don't know who the opposition is.
Right, right. And pardon me for interrupting, hopefully interjecting, but historically, what does that lead to? I mean, we've heard the expression weakness invites aggression, but I'm talking about the soldiers are on the ground. The people fighting this war, does that make them more or less vulnerable? How does it impact their day-to-day lives?
You know, when your leadership is coming across very weak or indecisive, naturally the military is going to not be given the credit that it should deserve. We have the world's strongest military, and there's no doubt about that, and there's no question in my mind. Should we be directed to do a strike, the military, of all people, want to have something out of this resolve so we don't result in another aggressive situation out there. They're going to want to do the job well. But if they're not confident in their leadership, then we have to sit back and wonder, we're going to do this strike and what's coming next.
Final question.
We all know this.
Final question, about 10 seconds. Do you feel that the military has been respected by this president?
Oh, yeah. I think that there's a lot of signals from this president that have basically watered down its capabilities or given the perception of that.
Jessie, Jane, Duff, I hope you come back on the program because I'm going to be requesting you. It's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Great. Concerned Veterans for America, Jessie, Jane, Duff. We will return with more on the flip side, AFR Talk.
American Family Radio.
AFR Talk.
I'm Bert Harper, Director of Marriage, Family, and Pastoral Ministries, and we're the American Family Association. When the pastor is strengthened, the home, church, and society are helped and blessed. Join us at repairingthefoundations.net.
Fighting to restore the moral foundations of American culture. The American Family Association, AFA.net.
We are the American Family Association.
Faith, family, freedom.
American Family Radio, AFR Talk.
A ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News on the Hour. I'm Chad Groening. A House GOP plan to keep the government operating past the end of this month is being delayed. Correspondent Jerry Bodlander reports.
The government's new fiscal year begins on October the 1st, and the GOP proposal would have provided the money needed to keep the government going through the middle of December. It would also have included a provision defunding the president's health care law. But the Democratic Senate would have been able to jettison the defunding provision while passing what's needed to prevent a government shutdown. That didn't sit well with House conservatives who want to derail the health care law. So House GOP leaders are now reworking their approach so they'll have the necessary votes. Jerry Bodlander, Capitol Hill.
Opposition forces in Syria say they feel let down by President Barack Obama's decision to pursue a diplomatic path to disarming Damascus of its chemical weapons. Rebels who'd been hoping that U.S. military strikes would help tip the scales in their favor now say America has indirectly given Bashar Assad a second wind. An opposition fighter in the northern city of Aleppo says, quote, "We're on our own." The heroism of the passengers aboard United Flight 93 were remembered again on the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. A man whose father was among those passengers told fellow family members, quote, "In a period of 22 minutes, our loved ones made history." Gordon Phelps spoke at a ceremony near where that plane went down in Pennsylvania. Similar observances took place in memory of the victims at the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. A media watchdog group is noting that in the year since a terrorist attack killed 4 Americans in Benghazi, the mainstream media has either scrubbed or censored every revelation that puts the Obama administration in a bad light. AFN's Russ Jones has the story.
It's been 1 year since Ambassador Christopher Stevens and 3 other Americans were murdered in a raid on the compound. Jeff Dickens, Deputy Research Director of the Media Research Center, says ABC, CBS, and NBC have failed to report stories that contradict the Obama administration's spin on events that happened that day.
Can you imagine if this was during the Bush administration and you had his defense secretary, Donald Rumsfeld, say, that Bush was disengaged during a terror attack, what kind of coverage that would have gotten. I think what you're seeing here from the big three networks amounts to censorship.
Dickens says the report also highlights multiple instances of government intimidation against whistleblowers.
It smacks of a cover-up. And you know how the liberal media usually, when they hear the word cover-up, goes into the full, bloodhound mode. And we have not seen that from ABC, CBS, and NBC. One has to ask the question, what event will it take? What bombshell will it take to get them to report 24/7 on these Benghazi bombshells?
While suspects in the attack have been indicted, the Libyan government has made no effort to apprehend the known terrorists. I'm Russ Jones.
The Marketplace Fairness Act remains very much alive, and so is the debate between conservative groups on both sides of the issue. AFN's Chris Woodward reports.
The Marketplace Fairness Act, also known as the Internet Sales Tax, would allow states to require certain sellers that are not physically located in the state to collect taxes on sales to individuals who are located in the state. The requirement to collect those taxes would not apply to sellers that make $1 million or less in annual sales in states where they do not have a physical presence. Stephen Damara, president of Americans for Job Security, favors the bill, adding, quote, "This is what pro-growth economics is all about."
It empowers states, it levels the playing field and gets rid of subsidies in the tax code, which is why people like Paul Ryan and, the very conservative member of Congress, Ted Poe from Texas, support this, as well as some liberal Democrats.
Dan Holler, communications director for Heritage Action, sees it differently.
Say you're a company based in Tennessee, for example, and suddenly, if you sell stuff online and you meet a certain threshold, you could be audited by the tax collecting agencies in California, in New York, in New Jersey, Connecticut, you name it, based on whether you're remitting the proper amount of sales tax to those jurisdictions.
The fate of the Marketplace Fairness Act rests in the House. The Senate has already approved the act. I'm Chris Woodward.
And that is American Family News on the Hour. I'm Chad Groening.
How can you explain America's economic system to a 5-year-old? What is capitalism? What is laissez-faire economics? And what is the free market? 101 level economics. We also explain why it's so important that America holds close to the values, the principles of those ideas. So like capitalism is defined private ownership.
Teddy James offers a crash course in economics in the September AFA Journal. Find out more at afajournal.org.
Are you ready for the truth? Bring